Welcome to PPI Conversations, an opportunity to connect with leading edge thinkers and leaders and discuss today's pressing topics in the engineering and construction industry. With your host, PPI Executive Director Gary Fischer. We at PPI address the root cause of major capital project cost and schedule overruns through the research and dissemination of project production management and its foundation of operations science. Enjoy the conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to what I think is going to be another really interesting PPI conversation. Today, we're going to discuss an issue that plagues many of you in our audience. You find a game changer like project production management, you're eager to enroll your colleagues to get them on board, but your ideas just don't seem to connect. It's like they're bouncing off of a wall. So why can't people get others to understand and support a great idea? We thought, who better to help us understand this than Terry Slattery and Jennica Dixon? In a few minutes, you're going to understand why. So welcome, Terry and Jennica. Thank you so much for taking time to share experiences with our audience today.
Thank you.
Privilege to be here.
You both have really super interesting backgrounds. And can you tell our audience today a little bit about yourselves, how you got in the position you're in, and what you're doing now?
Which one of us should go first? I can, why don't I introduce Terry, because I have the privilege of being Terry Slattery's daughter. So I've known him for a while. He had an incredibly successful career in high-tech sales. He was an absolute rock star in selling, but just over 35 years ago, actually closer to 40 now, you started Slattery Sales Group so that you could train and coach other people to enhance their careers and their earning potential with incredible selling skills. And I can brag about you a little bit, because like I said, I'm the daughter. Terry's skill, the beauty of the Slattery method that we coach and train for salespeople today is, we had one client describe it as the psychology of decision making. We're persuading people to change their behavior, and that's a hard thing to do. And truly, nobody does it better than Terry Slattery. And I can say that because I have grown up in the sales training and coaching industry. I have seen every system out there. I have seen everything on offer. And I actually tried really hard to avoid sales myself. My background is in finance. I tried very hard to run away and join banking instead of sales. But a few years ago, I did end up joining Slattery Sales Group full time because it's truly special what my dad knows, and I want to help share it with the world. So that's what we do in a nutshell, is we help train, coach, and consult salespeople and organizations so that they can sell more, especially in complex sales.
Interesting. So you introduced Terry. Maybe we need to have Terry also introduce you. We get some pretty good stories there.
The fun of this is, of course, Jennica didn't realize that our family was testing a lot of the ideas that I delivered in training meetings for clients. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so we won't do the whole story, but one of the most favorite stories was watching her decide when she was in high school with whom she was going to the prom. And I watched the decision maker in that little drama, and I watched the sales calls being made, and I listened around the corner, of course. And the most fun of it was to listen to her, having never been in sales, but applying the concepts that we teach, like, don't be more committed to an outcome that will benefit the prospect than the prospect is committed to that outcome. Because as soon as you get ahead of them, you're now trying to sell them, and nobody really likes to be sold. They love to buy, but they don't want to be sold. Okay, and so as I watched this decision and her process of getting through it, I laughed because I said, she's using this material, and as far as I can tell, it's a very natural behavior for her because she's been around it so much.
Yeah.
And now what she's done is she's taken the work with 2,400 companies in every industry you can imagine, and she's put it into an online learning package that's very distilled. It's very broken down into small components so you can address situations that you're facing. And she did all that because I didn't have the technical chops to do it, and it's beautiful. It works. And so I get to do now what I like best, which is help our clients understand the process of getting someone else.
So I got to ask, how did it work out at the prom?
Wonderfully.
You made a good decision then.
I did. I made an excellent decision. So it was a very fun experience for all.
Went with a dad-approved guy.
Yes.
Well, that's even better.
That was part of the decision-making process too.
It all worked out wonderful.
So before we dive kind of into our topic, I'd like to ask some, well, you've already shared some personal things, but I think it'd be really helpful to hear your perspective on what are like the top 3 things you've learned through your career. Maybe we start with Terry and then go to Jennica.
Sure.
Rational people don't get up in the morning and say, this is a good day to go through the pain of change. That is not something a rational person does. And yet for those of us who are in business, we often are trying to get someone else to give serious consideration soon to going through the pain of change. And so what I've learned are the things that we'll go deeper on about it, but it's essentially, like I said, don't be more committed to something that'll benefit them than they are, because that will put you in a process of being easily, if you will, manipulated. And also it's just a long conversation for the other person. You know, if there's a comedian who said a brilliant line, I forget who he was now, but he said, if you've only got one day to live, spend it with a salesperson. And he said, if you really only got one day to live, spend it with an insurance salesperson, because it'll seem like forever. And so that's
hilarious.
Yeah, it is.
And relatable.
It's the stereotype, right? It is the stereotype.
Oh, that's funny.
So the first thing we've learned is don't do that stuff. And what they're always doing is they're telling you stuff.
Yeah.
And Americans got a lot of people telling them stuff.
Yeah.
And people around the world have people trying to sell them things, telling them stuff.
Yeah.
We've learned that we don't learn anything when we're doing the talking. We learn things when we're asking the questions that cause us to be able to listen to their answers.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to advocate change, you want the focus of the initial part of the conversation is to get enough trust with them. And that starts by listening rather than talking.
Yeah.
But what's going to give you the privilege of listening is you're asking appropriate questions that don't feel like interrogation. That's first and most important thing.
Yeah.
Because you're out to find out if there is, in fact, motivation here to consider making a change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a planned conversation with a handful of very important questions, but they aren't, there isn't an eternal list. There isn't a long list of them. You're looking for certain data points that say this is the right environment for change to happen. And if we've done it enough times with thousands of people. And one of the things we've learned is it's such a wonderfully concise, disciplined process when you learn how to do it. They feel good, they're comfortable. If you find out maybe we're here too early, this isn't the right time for us to be having this conversation, that's a wonderful conclusion to reach and keeps you from being a pain in the rear end to somebody. So, you know.
Understand? Oh, that's great. We're going to go into that much deeper here shortly.
Yeah.
So, Jennica, how about you?
Well, I love this question because I'm going to answer it in the context of especially working with my dad at Slattery. One of the reasons that I came over to join him is because there's such great subtlety and nuance in what he has taught now for decades. And one thing that he and I both work really hard at helping people in sales understand is no matter how factually correct you are, so this is number one, no matter how factually correct you are, people will never thank you for pointing out that they're doing it wrong. And that's kind of the starting point of every sale, right? Is I have a better way of doing it. But the flip side of that is you're not doing it the best possible way, and people will not thank you for that. And we have clients who have groundbreaking solutions that they're bringing to the marketplace, and they're so excited about their technical solutions, and the all of the brilliance behind them, and they come in and they're like, we can solve this for you and it'll save, $10 million a day. This is amazing. The person they're talking to has just been told that they're bleeding 10 million a day. Nobody's going to thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so that's number one, is no matter how right you are, no matter how strong your case is, people will never thank you for pointing out that you're doing it wrong. And that has served me very well as Terry's daughter. I have used that in many other parts of life, and it's a really good thing to learn. No matter how good your case may be, people will never thank you for pointing out that they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
The second thing that I've learned, especially growing up in this world of sales and coaching and consulting, you're dealing with humans all the time. You're always dealing with humans, and nuance is everything. Don't tell, don't explain. People are already really uncomfortable with who they are and where their life is, and people have so much going on that it kind of ties into point number one. You don't want to just bring facts and say, this is awesome. You're dealing with another human, no matter how rational they are. We all make decisions emotionally and then justify them rationally later. So how do we work human to human to persuade or change behaviors? And it's challenging. And I mean, we can put all the data points into our CRM, we can use KPIs, we can do anything to, dataize everything. But at the end of the day, we're humans helping other humans go through the pain of change, which is the worst pain that we can do as humans. And that the third thing that I really learned then is, because of number one and two, leading with confidence can actually sabotage you in your goals. If you lead with confidence and say, I have an amazing solution, you're going to be so excited about it, that can actually sabotage you and not get you the outcome you seek, because the other human, because we're dealing with humans, the other human that you're talking to didn't ask for that. They didn't ask for your input. They will fight you on whatever number you give them. I'm going to save you 10 million a day. No, we're not bleeding 10 million a day. And now you're fighting. Leading with confidence like that can surprisingly sabotage your efforts, whereas leading with humility can really get you far. And Terry is the maestro of leading a conversation with humility and still absolutely getting it to where we want it to go. So those are three things that I have learned from my dad over the decades of watching these decisions play out. It's been really fun.
Well, we got a lot to unpack here, and hopefully our listeners can now see why we've asked you to join us and share your thoughts with us, because I know I'm pretty much doing everything wrong by the recipes you just gave. So let's start by kind of framing the situation. From a Production Institute perspective, there's no doubt that performance of capital projects can be significantly improved from a predictability, cost, schedule, value perspective, and an effective implementation really of production management really solves these age-old problems that have just harassed the industry and block performance. But effectively engaging others, whether it's on PPM or some other proven concept, is just extremely difficult, just like you pointed out. So let me just relay a conversation I can't tell you how many times I've had with project leaders, and it goes something like this. And it goes like this cartoon. We're going to pop up a cartoon there and look at, I'm leave me alone, I'm too busy. Everybody's seen that one before. But it starts with kind of discussing our mutual dissatisfaction with project performance. Nobody can write, the data are clear. It's pretty tough world out there. And then I attempt to explain why we have these age-old problems and how operations science and project production management solves these problems. Then the conversation gets really interesting, gets kind of weird when I try to enroll them in trying some of these new methods. And it goes something like this. I say, so the approach you're taking is not going to work. You're bleeding $10 million. I'm getting it.
Yeah.
And they say, yeah, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to keep it from happening on this project. I brought in lessons learned from XYZ, and we're going to be really focused, and we're just going to nail it this time. I'm just so confident. I said, yeah, but it's really not going to work. Yeah, I know it's going to be tough, but. And so, well, why aren't you willing to try something new? And I get one of two answers. Well, one of three. Occasionally I say, I get the answer, well, it can't be any worse than what we're already doing. And then, woohoo, we're on the road, but that's pretty rare. But usually you get one of these two answers. It's too risky. I just can't take the risk. Or I just don't believe you. And Neil Seth, who's a leading edge neuroscientist, taught us, it's not, I'll believe it when I see it, which is the common phrase, but rather I'll see it when I believe it. So Terry, why does this happen? Why am I so frustrated?
Well, the people genuinely, most of the time, might have something that they want to have done different or better.
Mm-hmm.
But they also understand that there is a component of risk in going through change. And so we want to, without having to get into the psychology of the conversation, if we feel like it's time to start a conversation, we want to be the one who brings up the, I'm okay if this goes nowhere. Now, we don't say that, but we execute that belief by the way we broach a topic. So for example, if I were coming to you knowing the role you're in, knowing some of the track record of the organization and how often things have been late, over schedule, way over budget, tied up too much, all those things, I'm not sure I'm bringing this up at the right time. Now, as soon as I appear to be a little vulnerable or a little uncertain or a little hesitant, it means that the other person doesn't feel like they're about to get hammered with a pitch of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and one of the things you'll notice as we go through this discussion is we're constantly refreshing a concept without saying the words literally, but by the way we ask the questions and acknowledge their answers, we're going to be saying, I'm okay if this doesn't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know what we do is right, and we've got hundreds of examples of it where billions of dollars have been saved. And therefore, you still have the same set of problems you've had for the last 50 years. And you have tried things, and none of them have worked anywhere close to what we know is possible today, because you know all that stuff right now. And so knowing that, we can very confidently say, I'm not sure I'm here at the right time. I may not be bringing this up at the right time. And notice it's our fault if this goes nowhere.
And he's leading with humility in the conversation. He's opening it up with humility. I might be here at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
And
takes the pressure off.
The power to them as to whether or not this conversation goes anywhere. So there's not any manipulation here. They're in charge.
Right.
And then I want to have a question, and typically you want to put a little story in front of the question. Okay. So if I know that I'm talking to someone in a certain industry where we know the history of projects in that industry, and results that we've achieved, then I want to be able to tell them a story and say, I'm not sure I'm bringing this up at the right time. We have several hundred conversations a year with people in your role across the globe. And one of the recurring themes is, and you start to describe the scenario from hell, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that they're probably going through, where we think this time it's going to be different. They go through the same overruns. They go through the same, didn't work as well as we'd hoped, all that stuff. But we're within the industry, quote, norms,
Mm-hmm.
which means everybody sucks at this. And therefore, I'm not standing out. And so if we tell that story and then say, and then we end up with a question, but once in a while we do encounter somebody who agrees with that story, says that's happening here, but they're actually wondering if it's possible to change it.
Mm-hmm.
What's your view of that?
And the beauty of the story, that one sentence story in front of it, is it takes pressure off of the other person to be in the wrong chair. Like you're doing it wrong, you're bleeding money, you're doing this. It takes all the pressure off of them. We're not calling them anything. We're not calling them out on anything. We're saying, this is what we're seeing in the industry. This is what we're seeing. And it takes pressure off of them.
Mm-hmm.
So giving the other person that space. And the conversation makes a huge difference because it's so easy to come in and say, you're doing it wrong. This is where you're bleeding. And most people don't like being told things.
Yeah, so you're doing this to start, excuse me, the conversation instead of telling them about whatever grand thing you've got to tell them about.
Which is so
You don't-
tempting.
If you don't tell them, how are they going to understand what it is?
Well,
Yeah.
the story that we tell will be so close to the experience they're having, but I'm telling it about other people.
Say,
And that's what causes them, as soon as they know this apparently is a bigger problem than just what I'm living with.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they may start asking you a question. And so if we say, so how much of that are you seeing? And, which could take us to, so essentially now that was just a real soft, is there any pain in your life around this issue? That's what that really is. So
yeah,
how's that? What are you seeing? What versions of that have you experienced? But notice it's not on the solution. It's on whether or not there's a problem.
so you're shifting it from kind of what could be perceived as a personal affront or attack.
Okay.
You're messing up because you're bleeding $10 million a year.
Right.
Hey, man, this is really common problems. Do you experience the same thing? Are you seeing the same thing? I see where you're headed there. So what do you do after that?
Well, if they say, well, we've seen some of that.
Yeah.
Right. You say, well, you're not alone. I mean, quite frankly, we built a business in the last 30 years around it. But one of the things we know is that there are effectively, when you're trying to sell an idea or a solution to somebody,
Mhm.
there are actually two dynamics at work. The first one is the pain of change. And like I said, rational people don't get up in the morning and say, this is a good day to go through the pain of change.
Yeah, no, it's not.
So the second idea that you got to understand is, and they're not going to do it unless there is compelling motivation
Mhm.
to do it. And there are all kinds of, if you will, cases where we see that people try to get people interested in a solution that the people haven't said they want to fix.
Yeah.
You don't have any compelling motivation, at which point you're going to be an irritant.
it's
So-
like a doctor trying to explain, I've got this surgery to fix this problem, and the patient hasn't yet even admitted that they've got a problem or have any pain to start with. And
Yeah.
you want them to agree to go under anesthesia and under the knife. It's going to be a tough sell. Whereas if you have a conversation that's focused on them instead, and you lay the groundwork that says this is safe, we can talk about this, you're not the only one, and start pulling out, where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? Where else does it hurt? Where else does it hurt? You're focused on them and what they're living with. And that's when they'll talk and they'll tell you more, and you're collecting things that will build up to being reasons to change.
So is the how do I say, is the motivation come from the pain,
Yeah.
the trouble they have that they feel personally, or that they feel for their organization? What is it? Is it the personal that trumps everything? That no matter what, it's personal always trumps?
Well, they're going to
Right.
act, behavioral economists refer to it that they're going to act in their own enlightened self-interest. Okay.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. But see what we're up against there are actually what causes tension in these conversations is we're bringing up the idea that maybe change is on the horizon for this person and they aren't yet sure they want to go through it. Okay. Or even consider it or get their label on it. Right. So there's this pain of change. But then there's the alternative to that, which is continuing the status quo,
Mm.
which already we know what the pain is probably because it's standard across the industries in which
Yeah.
you've had success and things have worked.
Right.
And so the net of that is there aren't any free moves in this conversation. You
Mm.
get to keep the pain. You can avoid the pain of change, but you also get to keep the pain of the status quo. Okay. Now, if this person has to go through the pain of change to improve things, but all the benefits of doing that go someplace else in a large, complex organization,
Right.
they're not signing up for this.
Mhm.
Even though they think the outfit ought to fix it, the enterprise ought to fix this. But if there's risk and work involved, and the benefits don't accrue to the person who's driving this in proportion to the risk and benefits and effort, then they'll kill it. They're out to kill it. They're out to dismiss it.
We see that a lot in complex sales when there are multiple people in the cast of characters, and sellers often try to approach the people that they think are a logical starting point for this. For example, if it's a large software solution, they might start with the IT department. That's not a good place, because the IT department is the one who's going to bear all the risk, all the pain of going through the change, and they get none of the accolades when it works. It's another part of the business that accrues the benefits or the savings of having gone and made the change. IT gets stuck with all the problems, but sellers start there because they think, well, this is a logical starting place. And in fact, they're talking to the people who have every reason to prevent the change from happening. And so getting your mind around, if this goes forward, if my great idea goes forward, who's going to be stuck with the pains of changing and who's going to accrue the benefits of changing? And are they the same people? Are they different people? Who should I be talking to with that in mind? It's a helpful distinction.
Yeah, so do you then focus your efforts on the people that will experience the benefit from the change
Right.
and ignore the other bunch, or what do you do? What do you do with the two bunches?
No, you can't ignore them. All you want to do is we've got labels we use for those two roles that we're talking about. There's the protector of the status quo, the one who doesn't necessarily want to go through the change, and especially if they don't get the benefits. We refer to that as the logical customer.
Sure.
It could well be someone who manages projects for a living and oversees a lot of them, and they've got a very full plate. They're not outside of the norms of their industry, so they're not any better or any worse than anybody else, etc. And therefore, they're probably making a good living.
Yeah.
And therefore, it ain't broke.
Yeah.
That's the logical customer. Why would I do this? The other one's the emotional customer. They feel the pain and suffer the consequences of the status quo. They are our natural ally. And the costs of not doing something tend to fall on their side of the ledger.
Yeah.
Because the other people are isolated from that, as long as that's the way everybody else is doing it. So you got these two decision makers. There's a logical one and an emotional one. And emotional doesn't mean that's how they behave.
Yeah.
It just says that they feel the pain of the status quo and would like it to change.
Okay.
They may not be able to empower it, but they know who the people are that could do it, because those are the ones that are saying, how can we do this better? And they don't know about you, they don't know about your solution or anything like that. But when we're targeting an organization in order to affect change, and if you're working within an organization, there's a wonderful question you can ask yourself. What's happening to us right now because we are no better than the worst of the other people in this business?
Okay, say that again.
What is happening to us right now because we're no better than the other people who are like the worst in the business?
Yeah, equally bad. Yeah.
They're equally bad.
Interesting.
What I want to know is, how does that mediocrity show up in this enterprise? And here's the question. If I were in an organization and wanted them to consider taking advantage of knowledge that shows there is a path out of this and it works very reliably, if I wanted them to be aware of that, I would ask myself this question. What's happening to whom in this organization right now because our capital projects take so long, cost way more money than they should, don't get to market on time, and all the economic opportunity costs associated with it? What's happening to whom right now? Because that's the reality. And what I want to know is, what is happening? How does it show up? When does it show up? Whose operating statement reflects it? And what you're identifying when you do that are the emotional customers. They already know about this stuff. They aren't aware that it could be different because they've got consultants coming in and telling them we got a new way to make those same mistakes with blinding speed or something like that.
Yes. And they're done that.
That we have a solution, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was watching a automation presentation that a client asked me to fly down to the city and meet with the board of this manufacturing enterprise.
Mhm.
And it was a room full of knowledgeable business people, you know, engineers and finance people and all that stuff. And I'm watching my client, the vendor, describe to them, here's how we can address these problems. And it's a very short, very well done presentation. And the board said, board says, ask your questions. So they ask a few questions. And finally, the chairman says, so net this out. What does this really mean to our organization? He said, well, it means that your people are going to be able to take twice as long before they make the usual bad decision. And, nothing much will probably change if you don't do this. I mean, if you do it, they're going to realize the pain of change is real. But the point is, if they don't do it, it's going to take you twice as long to do things as your competition soon.
Yeah.
And the guy said, I guess it's kind of like, if we're first to do this, we'll gain these advantages. And he recited the exact advantages. But the interesting thing about it was, he started out when the guy was driving the deal from a sales standpoint.
Yeah.
So quite frankly, if they don't do anything different, they're going to wind up taking twice as long to make the same bad decisions. They'll just have better data.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything else is going to change, but they'll go to the industry meetings and say, well, we've solved part of that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing changed.
Yeah.
And so he essentially told them, if you don't do this, you're going to be as bad as you always have been. And the guy kind of laughed and he says, well, that's not a suitable alternative.
Well, you would hope so. Yeah.
Let's vote.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So, so identifying those emotional customers, who's going to feel the pain of the status quo?
Yes.
And so, what do you do with them once you identify them? What do you do from that point on?
I want them to tell me when things have to change. Okay. So it starts out with, you're a large, sophisticated company. You got smart people. You got resources. How long have you been living with this situation? And they say, since I've been here 14 years, right? And when does it have to change?
That's a great question.
That draws out a lot of thought.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we like to think we're constantly working to improvement. That makes sense. What are the changes you're proudest of? Now it gets a little sticky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, we haven't made that much progress. Well, once again, when does that have to change?
Mm-hmm.
And how is it impacting the business? Because we haven't changed it. And you know the answers to that because you've been in that chair.
Yeah, I have.
If you go to Wall Street and they ask embarrassing questions about what's different this time?
Yeah, we're determined. Yeah, we're confident.
Yeah.
But I want to point out, as I often do with Terry's nuance, a lot of times when we're training and coaching people in sales on these things, they nod and they're like, I got it. And they go out, they find the emotional customer and they explain to the emotional customer, here are all the costs and consequences of not doing business with us. And that is exactly what not to do. So when you find the emotional customer, don't ambush them with facts, because again, leading with facts is a recipe for failure. Telling them things, recipe for failure. You might, do your homework ahead of time. Figure out the costs. Figure out the costs of the status quo, the consequences of not adopting the new thing. But don't ever tell it to them, because your assessment of the problem doesn't matter. There's the only one that matters. And so you want to run the conversation in a way that they tell it to you, which is why it's so important to stay in that position of humility, to be asking questions that don't interrogate, to be bringing it out of them. You want them to trust you. They're getting probably, I think marketing estimates are now about 4,000. They're getting about 4,000 messages a day telling them what to do with their time, their money, and their attention. If you tell them, they will tune you out at best, and at worst, they'll be offended that you've just called them stupid somehow. So don't tell them the costs and consequences. You want to run the conversation in a way that they tell you, which is why it's so important to lead with humility.
Mhm.
See, the goal of the conversation is to get them to start telling you, here's what the situation really is. Here's how it's affecting us. Here's when it needs to change.
Right.
These are the people who are living with the consequences. We still have an adversary over on the other side.
Yeah.
Who may be, again, the logical customer who says, I'm 2 years from going to the lake and I'm not getting into this mess, brother, because I've been doing it this way for 38 years.
Yeah.
And
Got no appetite for that. Yep.
Too risky.
I'm not going to do it. But one of the things we know is this: if you concentrate on cultivating the cast of emotional customers, and you don't need an endless supply of them, you need a few.
Mhm.
But if you get a few people who say, we're tired of having to forego other opportunities in our enterprise because of the costs of doing this stuff are still prohibitive for anything else.
Yeah.
As soon as the costs are unbearable and are bearing real lost opportunities associated,
Right.
they're going to want that to change.
Mhm.
And they will find the people who have the most ability to carry that case through the organization. We coach clients that sell to the federal government and program managers and all that stuff. And it's a very complex world and there's a lot of rules and stuff.
Mhm.
But when you find a motivated core of emotional customers, the ones who have real receptors for the pain and what it's doing to the mission, what it's doing to the enterprise, they get very brave about going to the rest of the organization, saying, we don't have to put up with this any longer. We can do things different. And
So they become sponsors for the change, internal
Exactly.
sponsors, and they know the people and they know the organization.
Right.
So they're able to maneuver and navigate through all that more effectively than anybody can.
And now that we have that, if you will, trust and confidence with them, it behooves us to understand how the organization actually makes a decision on a matter like this. Not who's the decision maker. That's nothing. Because organizations typically have a way they make decisions like this.
Yeah.
And it's imperative that we understand what is your process of evaluating an opportunity like this and then deciding whether or not it's worth doing. What's your process? And that'll take you to who. But if I start with how do you go about evaluating an opportunity like this and deciding whether or not it's a fit, you're going to hear all the other people that get to vote, including the logical customers.
Yeah.
And here's the beauty of it. When the cost of the problem is big enough and the cost of delay is big enough, it gets real hard for the logical customer to continue to stand in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Once they understand there is a solution, it's worked a few hundred times, literally, elsewhere, and has delivered astounding results. And it looks like this is a case where that could happen. They're saying that internally. They're carrying that because you don't want to be in front of that thing and be the person that says, let's not do this.
Yeah.
Let's
Very
do it.
interesting.
And so the questions they're only a handful of questions. How long has that been a problem? How long have you been putting up with this? How does it affect your enterprise? What steps have you already taken? And then the most fun question of all to ask is, how did that work? You already know the answer. It didn't, but I need them to say it.
Yeah.
And then the next question makes sense. When does that have to change?
Mm-hmm. That's
Okay.
powerful.
And if those are simple questions, but behind them is a ton of great experiences to getting clarity about, we don't have to put up with this anymore. We can do this different. But when you're coming with new ideas and change, it's always, this is the way we've always done it, which means I'm not going to go through the pain of change.
So in our prior conversations, you made it, left a deep impression on me that your job is to listen about 80% of the time, talk very little,
Yes.
yet control the conversation.
Right.
So peel that onion back for me a little bit more on how can you listen the whole time yet control the conversation?
Sure.
That I want to make one small nuance first. Yes, the goal is to control the conversation, but in typical Slattery fashion, we never want to control the other person.
Right.
And I just say that because I grew up in the sales training industry and there's a lot out there. And so
I bet. Yeah.
yeah, Slattery, Terry's approach is unique. My dad's approach is very unique. We want to control the conversation to drive it in a particular direction, but we never want to control the other person in it.
Right.
So
So if I
really-
were, let's
Mhm.
talk about how, if I were going to plan a conversation with you as an executive,
Mhm.
and I was even a colleague within the enterprise, but I'd want to get into your world, look at the world through your lens, if you will.
Mhm.
And so I asked myself the question that I went through a little while ago. What do I think Gary's putting up with right now? What are the things that are going on in his life? What's happening to Gary right now because he doesn't have this knowledge
Mhm.
about how these projects could be done differently?
Mhm.
What are the meetings he's sitting in on that are uncomfortable? Okay. What are the oh my moments at the end of quarters and fiscal boundaries and stuff when the results are lagging the expectation? I want to get a, if you will, an empathetic understanding of what your world is like right now.
Right.
I can do that without talking to you.
a little homework ahead of time. Mhm.
What's happening to these guys? How's it showing up? What have they likely tried to fix it? What do we suspect it's doing to their numbers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if I can break that down into the currency of the realm, depending on the industry I'm in,
Mhm.
I'm going to have essentially the same questions I ask everybody, but we just change the currency. Okay.
Yeah.
Because they do measure things differently. Some, on one side of the business, they measure it in time to solution, time to market, all that stuff, opportunity costs. On the other side, what's the input costs? And so there's, but as soon as I understand what are some of the questions that he has to answer, what are some of the things that are uncomfortable because he would like to have a solution. As soon as I know what those might be, that's the raw material for the story.
Yeah.
So, hi, Gary, I was listening to some guys talk about large projects and some ideas about getting better control of them. I realize I may be bringing this up at the wrong time, but how open are you to a brief discussion to see if what we've learned elsewhere might have value for you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What I've learned out of recent meetings I've been at might have value for you in the enterprise. Right. And now I got to have the story ready to go, but I've done my homework. I probably know the last time they had to explain why a thing was late and way over budget. And we once again had to go back and get more money or whatever the reasons, right? And so once I've posed that, I say, well, you're not alone, Gary. That's going on. We have hundreds of these conversations across the globe with people in your position. And they're telling us that it's getting a little uncomfortable to have to continue to do it that way, even though they've tried everything that the industry says this is how we do it. And the improvements haven't been there. So what's
Are there any sand traps in that conversation that you need to be mindful of and try to avoid? I mean, one you told me before is rather than saying, are you satisfied?
right?
XYZ, you say, well, how satisfied are you?
Exactly.
And that suddenly changes the conversation.
Right.
It is because it opens them up. Any of the normal conversation or any of the normal questions that we're used to asking each other in conversation, like, are you comfortable? Are you satisfied? Could we do X, Y, and Z? Could we meet again? Those are all yes or no questions.
Yeah.
And if you shift over to start with open-ended, now you're going to get a longer answer because they're not going to just say one word. Because once they answer you with a single word and a yes or no question, that ball's back over the net and it's your turn and you got to keep talking. And now that 80-20 ratio is way out of whack and you're doing more of the talking. And that's a disaster. So we want to make the ball stay on their side of the net by asking open-ended questions. How open would you be to, or what if, or, the who, where, what, when, how, but don't ask why. it tends to put people really uncomfortable. The only possible answer to the question of why is some form of self-defense, because whatever. So just stay away from why. That's just one small caveat.
Yeah.
The open-ended questions. But yeah, open the questions, leave them open. They do tend to talk more, but like my dad was saying, it's if you put some thought into it ahead of time, empathetically, what is this person dealing with? It's emotional customer, or if there are others, what are they dealing with? And think it through, and now you know the meat in the questions to ask, and they're open-ended. And he kind of ran through the bullet points earlier. You know, what have you been living with? How long has it been a problem? What have you tried? Those are all things that you want to pull out of them with open-ended questions, but you do enough homework ahead of time to kind of put a little story in front of it, soften it. And I mean, like he said, we've done this for over 35 years with over 2,400 companies in over 170 industries. We've seen a lot of salespeople take this and run into the marketplace with it. And one mistake they make is to go straight into interrogation mode.
Yeah.
Where they've got their list of questions, they get the answer, and they're like, yes, next question. And they go boom, 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 boom. And all of a sudden you can feel the heat of the lights. It's like, yes, crime show drama, man. You know, you're getting carried. This is not fun. And that's when the shields go up. So keep it soft and intentionally, like, put on the brakes, slow yourself down. It's really hard, especially if you're a personality that is in sales, because chances are you like to go fast and talk a lot. So we've seen people go boom, 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 and we tell them slow down. And it also helps when you're asking questions to actually slow the cadence of your speech, because it's a little bit less invasive, a little bit less interrogational, a little bit softer. And it's really easy to ratchet up the tension as you're asking a bunch of questions, and that too will get shields up. So, I mean, there's so much in the nuance of running these conversations and just maintaining that control, keep the pace gentle, ask your questions, soften it with a story. They're not necessarily the ones in the wrong here, but you're hearing a lot about this, and ask about this. And one of the most powerful things that we teach people is as you're listening for pains and you're trying to, you know, they're talking for 80% of the time. So you're just taking notes for a lot of it, and you're asking open-ended questions about these pains. Listen for what you don't hear them say. Because if you've thought about that business case ahead of time, and you've thought about what they're living with because they're not adopting your thing, you're expecting them to say something. You know what they're living with. You've thought this through. And so as they're talking to you, one of the most powerful questions that you can ask is, I notice you didn't say anything about this. And that's when you bring into the conversation possibly the elephant that they hadn't thought of. And they're like, oh, actually, no, yeah, that is a problem. They just hadn't thought to bring it up. So that's how you can bring up something in the conversation that you want on the table. Like, if it's costing you this much, like he said, whatever the currency of the realm may be, you can bring it up, but not in a threatening or, you know, I'm going to tell you how it is type way, but rather, I noticed you didn't say anything about this experience or this currency.
Yeah, could just be accepted pain.
Yeah. Well, what should we assume about that?
So yeah, you're kind of picking up on that. Do you ever see flipping a logical to emotional buyer through this way of questioning?
Absolutely. Because as long as they understand, you know, because we're doing a lot of the little soft negatives, you know.
Yeah.
So we say, you know, so essentially, you know, we're hearing these kinds of issues from people in your position across the globe. What are you experiencing? Right. He says, well, I think we've got that under control. So, well, then I'm probably here too early. But when you say under control, tell me more about that. They give you what to say next when you listen intensely to what they're saying. Say, well, you know, we've got our projects are consistently coming in on schedule. I say, that's really interesting. How did you accomplish that, since it's way out of the norm?
Yeah, I see. Way out of the norm was a key element to that. Way you asked that question. Yeah.
Right. now it's getting, and what we know is, see, we're using 1,000,000 word language.
Yeah.
To describe the performance of a business, which means when we're on a concept like the one we're developing right now, as soon as I say, tell me more, that's interesting, tell me more about that. As soon as that doesn't even happen to him at home, Gary. Somebody says, that's really interesting what you just said. See,
Yes.
so he'll be in this conversation because he likes it.
It's true. Yeah.
We're keeping him in, and we're actually listening to him. Okay. So that's really interesting. How did you do that?
Yeah.
Now I'm asking him to brag about himself.
Yeah. People like to be listened to.
Good.
They love to brag.
They love to brag. Yeah.
So I got to ask the obvious question. What are you going to do next to maintain cadence? Right.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Okay. So how are you going to maintain that leading position or
Right.
whatever it is?
Right.
Yeah. Wow. That's really,
And
man.
so that's how you get them talking, is you actually just simply listen and they will give you pieces. I'm pretty satisfied with this. And you want to say, well, sounds like maybe I'm here too early.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're satisfied, but tell me more about being satisfied. What are the metrics that you've been comfortable changing? See what he gives you, because usually they'll finally admit it's not perfect.
Yeah.
He gets comfortable enough. He'll say, well, it's not perfect.
There is some pain.
We got this place over here in this country, and here's what's going on, and it's not working for us.
Yeah.
You're not alone. Other people had that problem over there. As soon as he knows he's not the only guy that's got the problem, he now feels better telling you, but mine's even worse.
Right. So you put him in the easy chair, and it's like, now you're bringing him over to your side to have a conversation about it.
And then, so when would it have to change? So I'm only working with his numbers. I'm working with his information. I don't have a solution yet, certainly.
Yeah.
But I'm getting a feel for the level of, performance improvement that we might be able to talk about with them. So when you're trying to sell the idea, it's just a real good thing to not be more committed to their world improving than they are. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to underline something that you just did. People tend to be more willing to open up if you give them a chance to tell you what they want to tell you. And if you're coming in, especially if you're in a sales capacity in any way, they want to tell you how perfect the world is without you, because you bring the threat of change, right? You're a change agent. That's a huge threat. So as you're coming into the picture, they know people aren't stupid, they know you're an agent of change. And so they're going to tell you all the reasons why they should keep it the way it is. Let them. I think we often get so excited to go to how things could be better, but we don't first give the other human a chance to tell us everything that they like about the current situation. And if we can listen to that and affirm it and validate it and actually show that we're listening to it, something turns. And now that person is more willing to also talk about the things that aren't perfect, because they know you heard them in all the ways it is good. And it builds rapport, builds trust, and they know that you've heard them on all the ways that it is good, and they've gotten it out of their system. You've got to you've got to let them get it out of their system first, telling you all the ways that it's great without you first.
That is really interesting. It struck a chord with me because that's patient listening, and I'm not known for my patient listening, because I already know what the problems are.
Right.
And it's like, let's just cut to the chase. I know what the problem is, but you raise a really good point, and following your advice, then the walls don't go up.
Right.
The mind opens up a little bit. You're able to have that conversation and end up to the place of, well, what could be better? What are the possibilities of what could be better? And how could things change if you were able to solve those problems? How good could the business be?
Right.
Those kinds of things that become more exploratory with the individual. But it takes patience to get there, sounds like.
If they're insisting that the world is I don't have any pain. If we don't have, we're satisfied with the way things are.
Yeah, then I guess you're done.
No. You say,
no, you're not done.
It says, well, it sounds like I may in fact be here too early.
Okay.
Are you telling me it's perfect?
Mm,
Now, that's a yes or no question.
Yeah.
Because it's time for us to have that question, right?
Yeah.
Because, the joke I make when I'm doing programs is we've all got one of these things on if we're in a relationship with another human being.
mm-hmm.
If you meet the tall, blonde, blue-eyed, retired physician that has the match to this ring, you spend any time talking to her, you'd find out she's smart, passionate about helping people, great cook, wonderful nana to our grandchildren. It isn't perfect, Gary. She could have brought a lot more cash to this deal.
And she says that about you.
Yeah,
Exactly.
all a matter of perspective, isn't it?
As soon as you go to the end of the world and say it's perfect,
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
they go, well, no, I didn't say it was perfect. Oh, well,
Oh,
of the things that you'd like to have different or better, what comes to mind first?
Yeah.
CNC's telling you I'm the king of my domain. I don't have any problems. You just put your hand on the doorknob, if you will, and say, well, it sounds like I'm probably here too early, but before I go, I got to ask. It's perfect.
okay. That makes sense. So, wow, we could continue this conversation for hours. I find this so interesting and so different, a different way to think. I'm going to have to practice these things because it's not going to come naturally to me. Maybe before we put a bow on this, you could just, so we come back to the question, why can't we get people to understand and support a great idea? Kind of summarize the high level, the three key things or whatever you would do. Just restate those for our audience to reinforce what we've heard.
Obviously, resist the urge to tell them
Right.
where they're underperforming or implying anything about it. You want to go in, excuse me. If you want to initiate one of these conversations, get into their world. What's happening to them right now? Because they don't have this knowledge that we now have, right? Yeah. And how it might affect them. What you want to understand, what's the price they're paying to not have us in their life right now, today? What kinds of meetings are going on? What kinds of oh my phone calls are they getting? Yeah. You got to be at this meeting in an hour because the world's ending, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
The point is, I want to know what's going on that wouldn't be going on if we were in their life.
Right.
If they understood the solution. So, and the easiest way to do it is what's happening to them right now. How does it show up? Who feels it? What are the associated costs? Who pays them?
Mm-hmm.
What does it do to the business goals? See, I can think through all that. And now I've got context to ask these kinds of questions. And all I do is, so the first thing is know where the gaps are probably right now in their world that they'd like to close, even though we've never talked about it with them. And then I can ask the kinds of questions that we've been going through.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. I know where the gaps are. Second thing is don't get ahead of them. Don't get excited when you sniff opportunity in their answers. Mm-hmm. Maintain. How long has that been a problem? Be very consultative about this. Well, you're smart people and you got resources. What have you already tried? He says, well, we tried this, we did that. Well, that makes sense. How'd that work? You already know the answer. It didn't work, but I need him to say it, right? Well, we were disappointed in the performance. You're not alone. People have tried that all over the world because consultants make a lot of money telling you that stuff.
Yeah.
And you can throw dirt at somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is, and then I go to, so what do you think the level of satisfaction is within the enterprise with these projects and the results and the counter changes and the surprises financially? If we were to say, 0 to 10, how satisfied are they? Where do you think they are? Like, see, I can ask it of the enterprise. I don't have to pin this guy down.
Right.
That a lot of times will be a lot safer for him to answer.
Sure.
So know ahead where the gaps probably are. Weave a story that goes there. We have a lot of conversations in the course of a year around the globe, but here's what we're hearing, and you tell the truth, right? Ask the question, and what open-ended. So what's your view of that? What's your experience, right? And then that'll take us into, so what steps have you already tried?
Right.
Let him know that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Say, so how does it affect the business?
Mhm,
Big question.
mhm.
When do you think it has to change?
When do you think it has to change? Great question.
Right? And well, what kind of hurdles do you have to go through around here to get somebody to listen
Mhm,
to the fact that it could be better?
mhm.
What's the environment in which that has to happen? Right?
Right?
And so it's just those principles. And as I go through, I'm picking up information that even if in a large complex organization, there are several emotional customers.
Yeah, yeah.
And
sure.
when you do the what's happening to whom, you're identifying the emotional customers.
Yeah, yeah.
And like Jennica said, you got a wonderful question about, well, what do you think is the biggest problem that they'd like to fix? Is it the delay in time? Is it the time to market? Is it the cost overruns?
Mhm.
Is it what it does to the brand? You know, what do you think the issues are they'd like to fix? And then when they say, well, this would be important and that's important, you say, that all makes sense. I noticed you didn't mention this.
Mhm.
Should we assume about that? Oh, that'd be very important. And as soon as you add one more thing, they tend to jump.
Interesting.
That's not my domain. Say, well,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry, I won't ask you about it anymore. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, that's
If
good.
I-
So go ahead, Jennica.
Oh, I was just gonna say, for the sake of kind of summarizing, if I could kind of distill it down into one thought, it is, don't underestimate the pain of change that you're up against. We often see things in terms of benefits. We've already gone there in our heads that the world will look great if we go here, if we do this, if we adopt this change. But the
Yeah.
other humans that you're working with, they're threatened by the pain of change. We all are, when it comes into our world. And so do not underestimate the mountain in front of you of getting other humans to go through the pain of change. Don't take it lightly, because it's a very big thing. I think it was in 1979 when a couple of researchers came up with prospect theory
Mhm.
in behavioral finance, which is all else being equal, people will move more quickly to avoid a loss than they will to realize a gain.
Yeah.
They will avoid a loss, all else being equal, more than they will avoid a gain. And often we lead with the gain. You'll achieve these benefits, you'll achieve these savings, you'll achieve this, you'll achieve that. When in fact, the more effective thing is, this is what you're bleeding. We can stop the bleed.
Yeah.
And of course, we don't tell that. We run the conversation. They tell us, but that's our starting point, is not so much let's get excited about changing because these are the great things we'll achieve, but rather, what are we living with right now? And like Terry said, what are we living with right now? Who's living with it? What does their operating statement show? What's piling up today that we can
Stop the bleeding.
exactly.
I'm with you. Well, some of our listeners may be thinking, man, I gotta learn far more about this. And then you mentioned you have some online instruction and whatever. So maybe you could give us a little bit of a synopsis of what, if people want to learn more, how do they get help?
Sure, we can be reached on our website, slatterytraining.com. Slattery Training is our online hub of our programs and our coaching, training, and consulting that we do with people. We work with individuals who just want to enhance their skills, and we also work with large enterprises and everything in between. So
All right.
we do, coaching, training, and consulting there. And you can learn more at slatterytraining.com. And then there's also slatterysales.com, which is, it's the parent company of the online hub. So it's all the same. So either way, you'll find our programs there. So
All right, super. Well, thank you again for being so generous with your time and your experience and your knowledge. I find it really fascinating, and I think our audience will find it equally fascinating. So thank you once again.
thank you, Gary. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you.